Welcome to MacroHive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. MacroHive helps educate investors and provide investment insights for all markets from equities to FX to bonds. For our latest views, visit macrohive.com. Before I start my conversation, I have 3 requests. First, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave some nice feedback and let your friends know about the show. My second request is that you sign up for our free weekly newsletter that contains market insights and unlocked content. You can sign up for that at macrohive.com/free. All of these make a big difference to me and make the effort of putting these podcasts together well worth the time. Finally, and my third request is that if you're a professional or institutional investor, do get in touch with me. We have a very high-octane research and analytics offering that includes access to our world-class research team, our model portfolio and trade ideas, machine learning models, and much, much more. You can email me at bilal@macrohive.com, or you can message me on Bloomberg for more details. Now, onto this episode's guest, Nader Itayim. Nader is Argus's Middle East editor based in Dubai. Argus is a leading independent provider of global energy and commodity market intelligence. Nader has more than 15 years of experience covering oil and gas in the region, and today heads up the company's Middle East and OPEC coverage. Prior to moving to Argus in 2015, Nader has spent 5 years with the Middle East Economic Survey Weekly in Cyprus. Now, onto our conversation. Greetings and welcome, Nader. It's great to have you on the podcast show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, obviously, there's a lot to talk about in the Middle East at the moment. But before we do that, I do like to ask all of my guests something about their origin stories. So it'd be great to hear in your own words what you studied at university. Was it inevitable you'd end up going into energy markets and journalism?
Sure. I like the term origin story. Makes me feel like a superhero. So I think I'm what you'd call a citizen of the world. I think if that makes sense. I'm Lebanese Iranian, but I grew up in Cyprus, and essentially spent my schooling years there. University was in the UK, and now I'm in Dubai. Been here for 10 years. In terms of what I studied economics, and more economics with a touch of finance. So I don't know if you'd say it's necessarily that I'd necessarily fall into this. It was inevitable that I'd fall into it. But, I think the reason why I fell into energy is more about I had it at home. I don't know if you're aware of the Middle East Economic Survey. MEES?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it'd be good if you explain what that is for the benefit of the
so Middle East Economic Survey is a publication that was founded in 1957. It is actually a publication that was founded by my uncle back in the day. So I kind of grew up. This is a publication that's basically looks at economics, geopolitics, energy. It's at the crossroads of all these things. So it's something that I kind of grew up with in the background, but admittedly I didn't have too much familiarity with it. I knew that my uncle was a journalist. I knew that they looked at energy, but I never kind of asked when I was younger. So, I mean, the intention was not to go into this. As I said, I studied economics. I tried to go down the finance path, but when I was in the UK, it was a bit tough to get a job at that point. I had the wrong nationality. I didn't work hard enough to get a work visa after study. So ultimately, I went back to Cyprus and thought I would, start working at MEES for a little while, get a bit of work experience. And lo and behold, my nerdy side just kicked in and I just loved it. It became something that over time I started to really enjoy. Like I said, this energy being at the nexus of all these, politics, geopolitics, economics, it was fantastic. It was kind of all those things that I loved all in one. So that's where it started for me. And given that I'm Iranian, I also spoke Farsi, and I was told early on that although there are many journalists in the kind of international sphere who speak Arabic, there aren't many who speak Farsi. So I was told early on, look, this might be good for you. Like, try and make the best of it. You can stand out. So I started off kind of focusing on Iran, and then branched out. So yeah, my move to Argus was about 10 years ago now, and that's what took me from Cyprus to Dubai.
Yeah, that's great. And what does Argus focus on?
So Argus is primarily about commodity pricing, right? We're a commodity pricing agency. So I mean, that's really where the business lies. I am sort of on the, obviously, I'm the journalistic side of this. We have an editorial side, which is that's the marketing side. Sorry, the price reporting side of the business. But then I'm more on the kind of intelligence, news side of the business. So we have both sides. I think I don't mind saying that it's the price reporting side that kind of makes the money for Argus, and we're probably the nice to haves. But I think we do a really good job of it, and obviously it's a pretty big company. I think we have offices across the world, and yeah, and the office in Dubai has been growing as well. So we try to look at basically all the developments in the region, essentially what they mean, and tell our readers essentially what to expect going forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. I've been following you recently, and it was really good coverage that you've been providing. Now,
Thanks.
obviously, there's so many different angles we can approach the recent escalation through. But I suppose one basic question is, I mean, what's been the context of this war? Like, why is it happening now rather than say, we had a 12-day war last summer. Why didn't that escalate into a bigger war? And why now? What's the broader context here?
Sure. It's a fair question, and I think it's a question that many people had. I'd probably try to break this up into two things. There's the why is it happening now, and the should it have happened at all. If we look at the why it's happening now, I think it's fair to say it was almost inevitable. You mentioned the 12-day war in June. I mean, that in itself was a shock that it happened the way it happened. But I think there was a sense among particularly Iran watchers that once that war kind of ended too abruptly, it kind of ended prematurely. So neither side really achieved what they set out to achieve. Both sides kind of walked away with something missing, unfinished business, so to speak. Now I say this more primarily when it comes to Tel Aviv and Netanyahu, they're obviously the ones who, struck first. I think the nuclear program was the headline, but I think deep down there was an intention, sort of hoping for more out of this. And is that regime change? Is that regime degradation? These are all just, I think, many different ways of saying the same thing. But essentially, the idea, I think, at that point was to try and defang the leadership to a point that they would not be a threat or a real threat to Israel going forward. Now, did Netanyahu achieve that? I think most people would say no. Did he or did the US even achieve that base level kind of goal of obliterating, so to speak, the nuclear program? I think several months on, I think it's clear to say that no, and despite what they were saying, it's clearly still a talking point. So for me, and for many people, it was simply a case of when and not if. Now, the when was a lot of people were suggesting that it could happen before the end of last year, and I think I had no reason to reject that for any. But I think, I mean, it probably was going that direction. But if you remember, at the tail end of last year, sort of falling into the early January, that's when we really saw things heating up in Iran. Things devolved pretty rapidly, and I mean, it almost sort of dissuaded Tel Aviv to go ahead with anything, to say, look, something is happening organically. Let's see where this goes. And I think that's probably.
And this was all the protests that were going on across the country.
Sorry, yes. These were the protests that essentially they started as economic protests, but then quickly kind of devolved into something broader, asking for regime change, so on and so forth. Now, it was hard to obviously get a full grasp of what was going on because internet got cut quite quickly, and this became a global news about the fact that we're hearing nothing out of there. But it ended up being a pretty I can say bloody event. It's a horrific event that will be etched in history now. But anyway, I mean, moving on from there, things obviously progressed quite quickly. We went from Trump threatening action to negotiation within weeks, and it was pretty shocking, at least to me, how 3-4 weeks from those episodes, if you would hear the discourse, it was as if nothing had happened. It's as if we were back, pre-June 2025. we're all talking about the nuclear deal, and Iran was saying that these are my red lines, and the US were saying those are our red lines. And it was quite interesting to me. I mean, but anyway, they did, there was communication there, there were talks. Again, looking back, I think it's clear now that that wasn't necessarily a legitimate attempt at diplomacy on both sides. I say this because obviously we're now in a situation where twice, in the space of 9 months, there has been a genuine, process to negotiate between the US and Iran. Indirectly, directly doesn't matter. And then obviously midway through, um, there is an attack on Iran. So, I mean, now if we look at the should it have happened, I mean, personally, yeah, I can't see a reason why it should have. I mean, attacking Iran was always going to be an immense risk, not just for the US, but for the entire region. Many, many people smarter than I were warning this was going to happen. The Iranians themselves were warning that any retaliation could be regional. So I think anyone who today says that they don't have or didn't have or they didn't or couldn't see this coming, rather, I think either they're lying to themselves or they're lying to us. So I think the signs were there. I just feel like the powers that be ignored them and hope for the best.
And you talked about objectives. So, if we go through each of the main actors in this conflict, so we have Israel, and it seems like Israel really does want a severely degraded Iranian regime, possibly even state collapse. I mean, it seems like it's much more existential for them. They just really want to sort of decimate Iran, which implies that they're willing to kind of make this a protracted, long war. Then we have the US, where it's just very unclear to understand exactly what the objectives are. It seems to change
Hmm.
day by day, but it
Right.
seems like they don't want necessarily, they kind of want off ramps. And then we have Iran, where it seems like they're, saying that actually this is our sort of time to have a definitive victory of some kind, and we'll endure a protracted war, and we're willing to take on the global economy as our sort of leverage. Is that a fair characterization of the objectives of the three main actors, or am I missing something?
No, no, no. I think it's generally fair. I'd say, I mean, we were talking about Israel first. I would be careful to say I think these are more Netanyahu's objectives than maybe Israel as a state. I mean, Netanyahu has had Iran in his, or at least the Islamic Republic, in his crosshairs for decades now. So I think this has almost become a personal crusade for himself, and he's taking the country with him. This is now I couldn't say whether the country's behind this particular war. I think in June there was some appetite within the country for what was happening at the time. But I just feel like it's important to probably make that distinction. The US, I think that's fair. There is a clear, lack of communication of what those objectives are. It feels like if whoever you listen to is giving you a different rationale depending on the mood, depending on who they're talking to. And it is worrying how you're seeing many senators come out of these closed door meetings. Admittedly, they're probably Democrats, but they're generally coming out and saying, I can't say too much, but what I'm hearing in there is just worrying me, because it doesn't feel like there's an actual plan there. And I mean, you don't have to be in those closed door meetings to see that. I think I think the US has reached a point where they're internally thinking, okay, what do we do now? What is the next step? I think this idea of regime collapse, there was an assumption that they'll go, target a few different launch pads and a few different bases, and that's that, which is, was never going to happen. Iran is a massive country. The Islamic Republic has, it has deep, deep roots. This is not something that came up overnight. So this is always going to be something, and this idea of you're always going to need there to be cracks within the system for anything to happen long term or anything structural to change. And I still would question whether, almost 2 weeks into this war, are we seeing that yet? And I probably would say not, still not yet. So there is a staying power there. possibly stronger staying power than most would have imagined. But I think this is something that they ignored. And with Iran as well, finally, yes, I think it is existential for them. I think they themselves are using that word. And I think this for them has to be the war that ends all wars, because they clearly want to change the calculation in the region. They want to make sure that whoever thinks of attacking Iran is going to need to think twice and three times before doing so, because we don't want to be here. I think for years and years, Iran had its proxies, and there was the battle, so to speak, was happening in third countries. I think this changed a couple of years ago, and that's it. I think it's just we've been getting closer and closer to this point. So I think now Iran doesn't see diplomacy as an active pathway, at least not with the Trump administration, at least not now. Yeah, the U.S. continues to say that they're going to go for broke. But now, does that mean we're going to be in this holding pattern forever? No. Eventually, something's got to give. But at least on the Iranian side, I feel like if the regime does survive here, they will not be able to step back from this until they have shown internally that we have fought and this war is ending because the other side has said they've had enough. Because I think for Iran, success in June and success now and probably going forward is essentially resistance and survival.
And in terms of the supreme leader, Khamenei, he was obviously killed on the initial sort of strikes, and then a sort of number of other leaders or leadership, so people in leadership positions were taken out as well. I mean, have you been surprised about the resilience of the kind of the structure of the leadership structure of the country, that they've been able to kind of maintain some kind of structure there, or perhaps am I wrong? Has it sort of decentralized now to different factions?
So I think the decentralization is more when it comes to the IRGC and the military, and then what you're seeing, on the news in terms of that side of things. But in terms of, am I surprised that this system is as strong as it is and has lasted as it? I think I'm not surprised, but possibly the extent to which it has been resilient is probably slightly surprising, because I think on a personal level, I've been very careful over the years not to get, now I'm going to use the word overexcited. It's probably going to give a different connotation to what I'm trying to say. But every time we would see, we would see mass demonstrations in Iran, over the last decade. We've seen several rounds of this. Every couple of years, something will spark a demonstration which just grows and grows, and it devolves into something quite, existential for the system. And then ultimately it gets crushed. So we have seen this before. We had seen this dance before. And it was something, and this time in particular in December, January, I think people jumped the gun a little bit too quickly. We were seeing people, basically declaring the end of the Islamic Republic several days into this. It's all over. They're now dead. They just have to be buried. These kinds of comments were, surprising to me, because I thought we've been here before. It takes a lot more than this to go and, deal with a system again that has incredibly deep roots. So I was waiting to see something more, something different to what you've seen before I thought, okay, maybe there's actually going to be some kind of change here. Iran has seen change over the years. To suggest it hasn't, it would be wrong, but it's been incremental change. It's been societal change. So over the years, if you keep going, you'll see slight differences, but it's those major changes that were obviously taking forever to happen. So I don't think I'd say I'm necessarily surprised. I saw them fighting, and especially the fact that we are talking about something existential for them. This is new territory for all of us. So for anyone who could sort of predict how this was going to happen or how far they were going to go, I think that was always going to be a risky thing to do.
And the IRGC, the decentralization there, is that a sign of weakness or is that a sign of strength?
No, I think this is something that basically was set in motion, and this is one of the protocols essentially that exist. It's sort of when and if the command structure does for whatever reason break, at least there's a system in place which will allow the different elements of the RGC in different parts of Iran to essentially, go about their business how they see fit. And this is probably behind some of the more strange episodes of targeting that we've seen in the Gulf. I mean, there have been areas and targets that the government, I think, have actively or visibly looked embarrassed about because they simply could not explain them. I mean, I'm Oman was targeted twice yesterday, but that was the first time in over a week. I mean, they were targeted a few days in I think that we saw Duqm and Salalah targeted. These were oil storage terminals. That was surprising to me because it felt like Oman is really your one partner in the GCC that stood by you, and they've been, that of all the countries that were targeted, that one surprised many people. And when, the government officials were asked about it, they genuinely looked surprised and said, look, there are some things we cannot explain. So that kind of led me to fall into this. Okay, the RGC clearly has their finger on the trigger here, and they're the ones who are going to dictate where this goes. And this is why, a few days ago when you had the president kind of coming out and apologizing to the regional countries and saying this is going to stop, a lot of people were really skeptical about that, and rightly so, because we saw things continue. I mean, energy facilities were targeted before and immediately after that announcement, so it was a false dawn.
And in terms of the political leadership, it does seem like it's just not one person that's is like has complete authority. It seems like there's a collective of a number of different senior leadership positions, and they all have some element of power. Like there's this, as an outsider, we think autocratic leadership. There's just one guy at the top, he decides everything. But it seems like in Iran, actually, it's almost like a consensus-seeking body in some ways, and there's a couple of different voices.
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
it's definitely. I mean, over the years, it's something I've always tried to explain to people is when it comes to Iran, it's not simply one person or one body that is taking the decisions. There are several power centers that are always, at times, even sort of fighting against one another. The RGC is one very strong center. You had the supreme leader who obviously has strong links, but again, different power center. You have the government who is again leading a different kind of element of the structure. You have the judiciary as well. So there are these people, and now obviously over the last couple of weeks, or more than that, even before the war, you have seen certain individuals kind of rise to the top and very clearly be or place themselves as one of those key individuals to go forward. I mean, so Ali Shamkhani, who is now was now killed on the first day of the latest strikes. I mean, he was someone who, a former secretary or former head of the Supreme National Security Council. He was someone who had massive weight, and a lot of people before this war were potentially pointing at him to be someone who could maybe be that next, to lead Iran into that next period. Ali Larijani, who is the current Supreme National Security Council head, he has taken on an incredibly large role for himself in recent weeks, and obviously with the passing of Khamenei as well, it's clear that that position hasn't stopped. He suddenly became that go-to for the nuclear talks and when it came to the demonstrations. I mean, he played a massive role. This has been reported all over the place, and it's interesting because I mean, this is an individual who just 3-4 years ago was essentially barred from running for president. Now, there's a lot of people who say that this whole thing is it's a bit of a circus, just a show that's put on. And it's very possible that was done, obviously, with bigger things in mind for Larijani, especially, I mean, the Larijanis are a very important family in Iran. They've held he and his brothers have held some very important positions in the past. One of his brothers is a very high-standing cleric, and another one was a former foreign minister. So, I mean, there are these individuals who continue to play a very important role. So even if, now they've named Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader, I don't necessarily expect him to be calling all the shots. I mean, he has very storied and capable people around him to take those decisions.
And what do we know about Mujtaba Khamenei, the son? I mean, there's this impression, at least in Western media, there's this caricature of him as being more extreme, more of a radical. But then at the same time, it's hard to find much writings from him or speeches and
It
things.
is
So
hard to
it's hard
find
to know
much.
what
So
his.
yeah, I mean, I would say I'd be the first one to say that I'm probably not the best person to go deep into the character of Mossadegh Khamenei, but the truth is there are certain things that you can say about him in the sense that his name has been around this conversation for years, as a potential successor to his father. The thing is, he was always dismissed by those who have, Iran, really prominent Iran analysts who, I respect hugely. He was sort of dismissed as a very unlikely candidate, and that's primarily because the Islamic Republic and how it was built was the intention, at least one of the main intentions, was to move away from this dynastic system where you have a father passing on to a son. It had, echoes of obviously the Shah before. So this was not something that was supposed to happen. And many people say that if Khamenei had not been killed in the circumstances he was killed, that this would not have happened. If he had any say in how this would have happened, this would not have happened this way. Obviously, now Mossadegh Khamenei being placed in this position, a big part of that is the fact that he had backing, from within the RGC, who are incredibly strong when it comes to Iran, and powerful. He had the backing from the Basij as well, again, sort of paramilitary. So he had support and has power and support from really important centers in Iran, which obviously placed him there. I don't think everyone in the Assembly of Experts who essentially put forward the votes to select the new supreme leader would have been behind him. But I imagine with some, lobbying and pushing and shoving, we got there in the end, and he got the position. The thing I find interesting, and I've said this out, is that he was put here, or he was named rather, several days ago. I don't believe anyone's really seen much evidence of him since. And obviously, on one level, I understand that, because becoming the new supreme leader puts a massive target on your back, especially in the current circumstances. But at the same time, I think as the supreme leader at a time of war, especially the Islamic Republic's base would want to see who this person is, what he's saying, or rallying the people, so to speak. So that is one thing that I'm really waiting to see some evidence of. There are people who say that he was injured badly. He was, it's been reported widely that, as well as his father being killed, his wife was killed, his mother was killed, and one of his children. So, it is very possible that he's not particularly well at this point, or he's been injured. But at the same time, we have seen moments in the past, in history globally, where you've had these moments where key leaders were not particularly well, but they would set it up so that they could be placed in a way to actually, address the people and have that role. So I am waiting to see more, some kind of fresh sign of life from him, to see where we go next.
And in terms of opposition, it seems like there isn't really much credible opposition to the current regime, even opposition in exile. People talk about the Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi. How credible is he as, a possible, person that the US and Israel could place there? How is he viewed, within Iran rather than amongst the diaspora?
Look, in general, when it comes to the opposition, I think, again, I keep repeating the term that the Islamic Republic has deep roots. I think over the years, what's happened is that the Islamic Republic has not really allowed for an opposition, or a real opposition, to form, or essentially create roots of its own, because it doesn't want that. It's simply, every time there has been any sign of that, it's been, dealt with quite swiftly. Every time there's elections, we talk about the reformists and the centrists, and these people exist, but it's all relative. And I think the reformists in Iran are rather weak, and have been weak for many, many years. I think that's the closest thing internally that you have to an opposition faction of any kinds, or at this point in time. Externally, yes, I think there is in Reza Pahlavi, you have someone who the opposition, or those, at least those who oppose the current system, can look towards as a unifying figure. And I think that's probably the biggest reason behind why we were hearing, people chanting his name in Iran over that period of unrest. I'm sure there are many people in Iran who genuinely felt or feel that he is, the rightful heir and he should be the one to come and take over. I don't deny that. I'm sure there's many people, but I'm sure there were also people there who, were chanting his name as an alternative to the current rather than a choice, rather than a first choice. And even speaking to Iranians outside, I think that that sentiment, it carries beyond Iran's borders. There are obviously those who are, we call them the royalists. There are those people who are genuinely and deeply insistent that the only person to take us forward is Reza Pahlavi. But there are many people who they simply do see him as a unifying figure that can possibly, take Iran, or at least help Iran through this transitionary period more than anything else, on the way to finding someone new. Because not everybody is interested in going back to, the way things were before, and having a Shah, so on and so forth. There are some who do and some who don't. So I think that's the best way I can sort of explain how things look at this point in time when it comes to Reza Pahlavi. Because truthfully, even if you listen to Pahlavi himself, maybe things have changed ever since the war started, but he himself doesn't necessarily feel like he's interested in taking over and becoming the new leader of the new Iran. I think he's quite comfortable with the life that he has. I think he sees himself as someone who can possibly help with the transition. But I would question whether he himself even would want to come back and take this on himself. I may be wrong, but that's just my reading.
Okay, now if we kind of go into the actual war itself, there's been a couple of things that have, I guess, surprised, how should I put it, lay people, people who aren't as knowledgeable. One is how Iran has been attacking the GCC countries, especially UAE. It feels like they're targeting UAE more than Israel, it seems. So, and obviously they've been targeting Qatar as well, Saudi more recently, Bahrain, Oman, as you said. Can you explain a bit more about why this is happening? What the pressure points there?
Sure. Look, so this, I think it would be fair to say it surprised most. One, how quickly this happened, relative to, I don't know, let's say June, but also the way, or what is being targeted. I think last year when this happened, we only saw, it should never happen, so I think it's wrong to say only, but we saw one US base in Qatar targeted when essentially things were over for Iran to save face. And over the 2 years prior to that, this was Iran's MO. We need to do one face-saving attack just to kind of draw the line and we move forward. But clearly this was not delivering the message that Iran was hoping it would deliver. Obviously, with this extensive telegraphing beforehand that we're going to do this, empty your base, so on and so forth. Naturally, Iran did not want further escalation, so this is how they decided to deal with it. It felt like this time when you had the sheer size of the armada and the military, the amount of military hardware that was just moving into this region over the last few weeks, or the last weeks prior to the start of this war, I think there was a clear understanding in Iran that something was going to happen or could very well happen. And you could tell from the messaging that there was a nervousness, and the messaging prior to the war was clear. If we are hit, we are not only going to hit back as we have before, but we're going to hit any assets in the Gulf that are US assets, US linked assets, Israeli assets. So they left that quite open. And when you watched kind of Iranian media, there were all kinds of talking heads and commentators who were saying a lot of things and suggesting all kinds of targets. Yes, from the military targets that everyone was expecting, but to even business hubs. I mean, there was one journalist who, I mean, he's quite well known. He's done a few interviews recently. His name escapes me, but he himself was coming out and literally giving neighborhoods in Dubai where different US companies had their offices and saying this would be a target, this would be a target. I mean, there was people in the UAE at the time going, is this something we should be worrying about? And initially, when the conversation was around US military targets, I think most people dismissed it and said, look, this is not the UAE's war. If Iran is going to be targeting bases, that's Iran's only real way of hitting back at the US. The US is too far away. So this was the assumption. But then, and obviously that's what we started to see from day one. Like I said, the speed at which Iran retaliated was surprising. And the fact that over time, it very quickly moved away from just military assets. I think from within a day or two, it started hitting infrastructure. It started hitting energy infrastructure. It started hitting, even we'd have some interceptions over residential areas. So clearly civilian areas, and that takes things to the next level. So I think this is all part of Iran's message and insistence that this time is different. If you're going to do this, we're going to make sure that there's pain not only for you, but for your allies in the region. And essentially, when it comes, obviously, what everyone's been talking about now, the Strait of Hormuz. Energy is a global commodity that it impacts everyone. So I think with all that's happening now, Iran has decided that we are going to, create as much pain and as much damage as we can, to the extent that we can, until someone is able to, I guess, talk some sense into the US and stop this. And I think Iran's, repeated insistence, at least over the first 10 days, that, their messaging to the Gulf countries saying this is not our war against you. I mean, as of now, those words really ring hollow because the Gulf countries are not happy. And I think barring Oman, I think we've been hearing some pretty harsh rhetoric, either publicly or even privately, towards what Iran is doing. I think the Gulf countries are really losing patience with what's happening. And this is the thing. I think most countries would probably feel that it might be soon time to retaliate. But again, there's a calculation that has to be made there. Iran is not going anywhere. This is your neighbor. So I think if these countries were to get involved in a forward stance, so to attack rather than just defend, I mean, that could open another can of worms for the Gulf in whatever happens after this war, if there is a continuation of the Islamic Republic. And given the mixed messages that we're seeing from the US, and given, for the last 2 days, we've heard, Donald Trump and some of those around him pretty much declare victory, which I'm sorry, but that does not reflect even in the least what's happening on the ground. So you could necessarily see Donald Trump decide tomorrow, you know what, this is not for me. I've lost interest in this. I actually set out to, damage Iran's ballistic missiles program, and we've achieved that, and we're done. So thank you very much. If they turn around and leave, that leaves the Gulf countries in a massive bind if they were to have also gotten involved. So I think the Gulf countries are engaging in a lot of patience at this point in time. I don't know how long this patience can continue for, but they're definitely in a difficult spot.
And in terms of the Straits of Hormuz, obviously this has been one of the sort of the biggest impacts on global energy markets. There's kind of two sort of counter prevailing forces here. One is that the US has said, we are going to do sort of naval support for ships. It's going to come soon. We'll underwrite insurance. We're going to send in our minesweepers, so everything will resume as normal. And then at the same time, you have the Saudis using alternative routes down through the Red Sea, the other pipelines. So there's some mitigating factors. Then on the other side, you have the Iranians saying, look, we've got our drone swarms. We're going to put mines everywhere. And so that makes everyone nervous, in terms of markets, people that I speak to. I mean, how do you kind of, reconcile all of this? How do you what weight do you attach to each? Is it possible for the Straits to reopen?
I mean, first things first, I mean, the disruptions, they're very real. I think what we're seeing at the moment, you can, I mean, if you look at vessel tracking, you can see that the traffic is I wouldn't say it's stopped, but it's all but stopped. I mean, you're only seeing the odd tanker going through. I think I saw numbers, we would see probably 130, 150 ships across the Strait of Hormuz prior to this war. Now you're seeing single digits at best. So obviously, I mean, where is this different to before? Energy is now very much part of the equation. We didn't see this before. So on one hand, you are seeing energy installations hit key refineries. Then they're very about choosing their targets. You'd have to say that Iran is being smart. Again, I don't like to use that word, but in Saudi Arabia, they targeted the biggest refinery in Ras Tanura. In Bahrain, they targeted a pretty big 400,000 barrel per day refinery in Sitra. It's their only refinery. So they're going for the big and bombastic. We're not talking about, some little minor hits here and there. These are serious targets that they're going for. And oil storage facilities, again, these are some of the world's, in Fujairah, that's one of the world's biggest, shipping hubs and bunkering hubs. So you hit storage there, you're basically hurting international trade and ships that come there to refuel, ships that come there to actually load and unload. So they're doing this to, again, exercise maximum pain and on the world. If we're going to talk about Strait of Hormuz more closely, I mean, this is the ultimate choke point here. And the interesting thing for me is that this has been something that has come up every single time Iran gets in a geopolitical bind. The world has talked about the Strait of Hormuz and what Iran could do. And then we would see, politicians in Iran, we'd see members of parliament regularly bring this up, and the whole world would stress and freak out. But admittedly, even myself, I mean, I was skeptical over the years, and I'll put my hand up, and I have many tweets and posts on X which would show that I was skeptical that this would ever happen, purely because I would think that it's simply too important to the global economy for anyone to allow this to happen. I.e., if this happened, then there would be a coalition to come in and sort this out ASAP. In the same way that they say, some companies are too big to fail. It felt like that. So this is essentially the first time it's effectively been blocked. And there does really feel no immediate or feasible way for this to reopen. The Iranians have constantly said, or the government, so to speak, were saying initially that this is not our intention. We're not closing the strait. But then that essentially comes back to the question of what on earth did it even mean to close the strait? I think prior to this, everyone was thinking, are we talking about mining? Are we talking about actively putting vessels there to target others? We didn't know. So obviously, essentially, what's happening now is we're seeing vessels being targeted even outside the Strait of Hormuz. So it's difficult, and we're even seeing some of the individuals I mentioned before, these kind of Larijanis and such, using the Strait of Hormuz in their messaging. So how do we get around this? I mean, the programs or the suggestions, the proposals that the U.S. has put forward in terms of, a naval escort or insurance. I mean, I think they sound better in speech or in talk than they would in reality, in practice rather, because I mean, when it comes to escorts, something that a lot of people have pointed to, which I would agree with and repeat, this is not the 1980s. I think the first time we saw naval escorts in the Strait of Hormuz was during the tanker wars. And at that point, the volume of shipping through the strait was considerably less than it is today. At that point, I think we were talking maybe one naval escort a week. It would take, a convoy of ships at one time. And also, but the thing is, today it's also a different environment in that you have the weaponry that we're dealing with today is also different. So you have projectiles, you have drones, you have very unpredictable forms of attack here that create far more bigger risk than it ever did in the past. So, there are those that feel like if they are escorted, that makes them a bigger risk than if they went by themselves. You are seeing currently many ships that are now at least trying to cross the Strait of Hormuz. They are basically posting messages on their transponders to sort of say things like, friendly ship or Chinese ship or Russian crew, or they're trying to put things there to kind of cover themselves. But then is it necessarily working? Who knows? Because obviously, even if you are not a friendly ship, or not, I say friendly, even if you're not a so-called, quote unquote, a Chinese ship, you can put that, who knows? And we've been seeing Iran target all kinds of vessels. I don't think there's any necessary thread through that. The insurance proposal as well, it's difficult. I mean, details are still thin on the ground. And again, I think the insurance proposal is linked to this idea of naval escorts. We don't think it's necessarily going to meaningfully change the current situation or increase traffic, because the threat still exists. We had one trader again telling us, like, if a ship takes out this insurance and is with a naval escort, again, it's like painting a massive target on your ship, because Iran would know that essentially, targeting the ship would directly force U.S. taxpayers to foot the bill, right? So that was interesting. Interesting that I heard, and obviously insurance.
And what about this talk of tiering? There's this notion that there's tier one countries like China that Iran would allow the ships to go through.
Yeah.
Then maybe like India, Bangladesh, some of these sort of tier two, and then at the bottom of the tier is the US sort of linked ships. Is that possible? Or
I think we've heard of this before, but the thing is, I think we saw something similar when it came to Bab al-Mandab and the Houthis. There was, at least then, it was more clearly communicated that we are going to allow certain ships and we're not going to allow certain ships. But again, if you actually went and looked at the ships that are being targeted, there was no clear definition of this ship being more of a risk than that ship. I think when it came to Houthis, it was clear that we were only going to target American and Israeli linked ships. But then you were finding ships that were being targeted with all kinds of links that were not necessarily Israeli. So in the same way, we have been seeing rumors or certain people coming out with statements saying that, we're going to allow certain ships and not allow certain ships. But if that were the case, we would be seeing a bit more traffic than we are today. So I think the risk remains. And again, given how many people that there are in the IRGC who are willing to talk and are continuously talking, in the Iranian, power structure that are continuing to talk, there will always be someone who will say something that will scare people off. I mean, this thing about burning ships in the sea and we're going to target, it's a constant threat. So even if one person says something that is reassuring, you'll have three others that will turn around and say, nope, that's not the case. So there is this risk, and unfortunately, until the strait is formally opened, we're going to continue to see these issues, supply issues.
You mentioned the Houthis there, and actually, before we talk about the Houthis, let's talk about Hezbollah. I mean, you said you have a Lebanese background, as well. I mean, as an outsider, again, many people were under the impression that Hezbollah had ended. I mean, they'd be completely sort of defanged, but they seem to be exerting quite, a lot of strength in terms of, the number of missiles and the forms of attack on Israel. So, what's your thoughts on that front? And then we can talk about the Houthis.
I think it's fair to say that in large part, Hezbollah was degraded and has been degraded. I don't think there's a question. And the fact that Hezbollah had kept quiet for quite a while was in itself a win. There was a clear for the Lebanese government, there was a clear message towards them, and I guess from the Israelis as well, because you have to understand, yes, that there's been a ceasefire over the last year or so, maybe more, but this ceasefire has not seen the Israelis stop targeting Lebanon. We have seen continuous strikes, particularly in the south, against all kinds of targets that Israel has said they deem to be threats, and they've been going after them. So I definitely would say that Hezbollah has been weakened. I think even Hezbollah supporters would admit that to an extent. But this struggle within the country to sort of say that, okay, you have to hand over your arms, and this clearly has not happened, and you've heard Hezbollah continuously insist that they're not going to do such a thing. I guess we've seen now, and that they are still capable. They're not completely defanged. They're not completely degraded. They still had weapons that they're clearly willing to use. And this felt like the time that they were actually going to do so, because there had been moments in the past where there was questions as to whether Hezbollah would get involved, and they didn't. They sat back. I think for their own existence, so to speak, they felt that it's better to lay low and just regroup rather than get involved now. And I personally even know people who would be considered supporters of Hezbollah who are not necessarily happy that they went and did what they did to drag Lebanon back, because now Lebanon's going through another stretch of incredible bombing, and it's just horrific scenes to see.
And the Houthis, I mean, people have been surprised that they haven't been more active. And there's one theory that Iran is holding back and they'll activate them, at some point later in the war as kind of a second wave.
I mean, I'd again say that I'm surprised as well that they haven't gotten necessarily that involved yet. But the thing is, I think the Houthis still remain a threat, especially if we're going to be talking about energy. You mentioned that the Saudis have this alternative export route. So just to touch on that briefly, the Saudis were primarily and have been using the Strait of Hormuz to export most of its crude. But many years ago, they built what is now known as the East-West Pipeline, literally traversing the entire country, which will take crude from their main terminal on the east side all the way to the west at Yanbu. And that would essentially allow the Saudis to export through the Red Sea rather than the Gulf, the Middle East Gulf. So whereas having this outlet, in theory, allows Saudi Arabia to not be as impacted as some of the other countries that depend on the Strait of Hormuz, the other slight issue here is that obviously you have the threat of the Houthis sitting there at the Bab al-Mandab south, at the south end of the Red Sea. So if they wanted to, they could really become a problem and create another obstacle for world energy markets to basically get the supply it needs. I mean, already supply has been significantly hit. I think we put out an estimate earlier on Monday that the 5 countries, so Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, and Bahrain together combined as of Monday had cut their production by about between 6.2 and 6.9 million barrels per day because they could not export and they were running out of storage. I think that number has probably increased to somewhere around 8 million barrels per day as of now. So this is the thing. If you're going to go and shut in potentially or create another obstacle in the Bab al-Mandab, that's, I think, when they could become a massive player in the current conflict that we're seeing. But so far, they've stayed quiet. I think they themselves have been degraded to an extent. So I guess they're biding their time to see if this is really something they need to get involved in or not. And also, I think of all of the proxies that are linked to Iran, I think the Houthis, of all of them, are the ones that have the most autonomy. I mean, that's how I've always seen them. I think you've had the others have been more linked, or you could say their decision-making is more linked to Tehran. But I think the Houthis, although they do have strong links to Tehran, I think they also have their own decision-making, their own policy-making, their own goals and interests that they do go after, which is not necessarily always linked with Tehran.
And you mentioned the loss of millions of barrels a day. There is talk, of course, of releasing SPR, or the various SPRs around the world.
Right.
That's one. And then even coming into this crisis, there was talk of spare capacity,
Mhm.
across the world. So how do you kind of think about that as something that could alleviate the pressure here?
Yeah. So I mean, so the 400 million barrel release from the IEA. I mean, it's big. This is the biggest release that I think in their history, and by some distance. So the fact that this has come out is important. I think this is only the sixth time as well that the IEA has actually issued an emergency stock release since its formation in the mid 1970s. So now, in terms of the impact this is going to have, if we're going to look at the numbers I gave, let's say if we're assuming 8 million barrel per day cut from supply, um, if you just look at 400 million barrels per day on its own, I think we're looking at maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 days of cover. That's simple back the envelope calculations, but that's not considering how quickly these barrels can be released into the market, because that's a question. This is over a period of time. So if we do this over a period of time, I think this is going to help slightly relieve the current situation. But truthfully, this is only going to be a short-term solution, and this does not solve any real issue. This makes the deficit, so to speak, that we're now experiencing less acute, but only to an extent. So I think we're being seeing that. I think the US SPR release themselves, they were suggesting that this could happen over the space of maybe 120 days. So it shows, I mean, we're talking less than 2 million barrel per day release into the market. So in that sense, given what we've lost, it's still only a fraction. So even if you add what's coming out from the other countries, again, it's only slightly improving the situation. So we still have a problem on our hands, but obviously doing this shows from the US side and from the OECD side and the world that there is a concern, a more long-term concern around supply. If we're talking about OPEC, yes, so spare capacity has always been a major talking point when it comes to OPEC and OPEC plus. The thing is here that I think OPEC plus as a group are largely sidelined because of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. You have a situation where these countries can decide that they're going to increase production or tenfold. You cannot. You simply cannot. There is nowhere for you to put this crude, and there's nowhere for you to send this crude. So, I mean, 2, 3 days before or a day after, I can't remember, I can't figure out the timing. I think the day after this war began, OPEC Plus had a meeting, or at least the eight key producers had a meeting to decide what do they do next. I mean, that went up in smoke, frankly. It's irrelevant what they said. Instead of increasing production like they decided, many of them have reduced. And the thing about those countries that are now hamstrung by this situation at the moment, this region is where the majority of the spare capacity lies. So we were talking spare capacity of 4.55 million barrels per day. I think that's our assessment. This is all in Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Kuwait. You really don't have any real spare capacity outside this region. So if we did, then wonderful. You'd have other OPEC plus countries stepping in, increasing production to make up for it. But you simply don't. It doesn't exist. So now, whereas you have spare capacity, it's really trapped. So this is the thing. OPEC plus as a unit will struggle to impact the current situation. It's more about member countries figuring out ways, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have, to find alternative routes to at least basically get as many of the exports that it possibly can out into the market.
And in terms of oil price forecasts, I know this is incredibly difficult to do, but you know, do you have a base case? Are we going to stay around $100 for the foreseeable future? The Iranians talked about they want oil to go up to $200 to be the max pain point. What is your forecast? How should we think about forecasts?
Yeah, I mean, many people say forecasting is a fool's game, and I would tend to agree. I don't think I wouldn't want to go out on a limb and say this is going to happen. It's hard. I wouldn't want to give anyone this false impression that I know. Nobody does. But what we've been seeing recently is obviously this conflict it's incredible the volatility that we've seen in the oil price over the last couple of weeks. And it's mainly being driven by headlines rather than fundamentals. I mean, if you're going to look at the fundamentals and look at the supply and demand, um, as I mentioned, there's already a significant amount of production and therefore exports that has been shut in. And I think that to an extent has largely already been priced in, because really, in terms of what's shut in that region, I don't think we're going to see that figure, which I think now is around 8 million barrels per day, increase much more than we are at today. Because essentially now what most of those countries are doing is producing just enough to run in their own refineries and then use domestically. So it's basically what they need to require domestically, they're producing that amount. Anything beyond that, they simply cannot do. The Saudis and UAE obviously can also produce what they can export through their alternative routes, but that's it. But so long as we see tankers get hit, so long as we see infrastructure get hit, in this region in particular, you are going to see prices continue to kind of creep up over time. I think now we're around $100 per barrel. I mean, that jump to 120 that we saw overnight was something unreal. But then obviously it corrected quite quickly. I would like to think that if things continue as they do, you're bound to see prices continue to creep up. I hope that we don't get to the point that we were at 120 or more. I'm not going to rule it out. In terms of the rhetoric, you're having the Iranians saying, "Oh, 200 barrel per day oil, get used to it." The thing is, that's not somewhere I expect we're going to get to. I think it's gonna be a while before we're even contemplating something in that region. But the continued worry is really the fact that you have a market that is now being driven around on sentiment now primarily rather than fundamentals. So, and with certain people in power who are very comfortable speaking and coming out with all kinds of headlines that can contradict at times, you are going to continue to see volatility, and you're going to see prices, I think, continue to rise, at least in the short term.
I mean, again, this is another difficult question, but many people, at least investors I speak to, have the base case that this conflict will end relatively soon, because it's too much pain for everybody. What are your thoughts on that? And what would kind of happen to make you think that this will be a protracted war, as in like it goes on for months and months and months?
Well, I think when it comes to the Iranian side, as I said, I think they have to be seen to be duking this out for at least a certain period of time before they themselves can consider pulling back. What they're doing so far, they're holding their own very clearly, despite what we're hearing out of Washington. So I think on the Iranian side, there's at least they would want to go on for at least another week or two just to prove a point. At the very least, they are getting hit very badly. I mean, you can see the civilians are also getting hit. The cities are getting hit. There's no question about it. And then the military as well, from what we can see, is also getting hit. But they're continuing to launch. And I think but they're launching projectiles and missiles at a lower rate. So this is the thing. I think it started at high intensity. Now they're preparing themselves for something lower intensity, attritional, and just maintain this level of chaos in the region and keep things, keep those obstacles all in place to continue this pain that exists. On the American side, the calculations are a bit different. Again, I touched on this earlier as well. I think this comes down to, again, economic pain and really the point where Trump decides that he's had enough with how things are going. Because I don't necessarily believe that the Trump administration completely understood the risks here that existed. I think there is an understanding that things are probably not going the way we wanted them to go. I don't know if I can say that they're getting out of hand. It certainly looks like it in some cases. But there may well be a point where he decides that he's done with this. And as I said, he will rejig his stated goals and move forward. So I think it's one of these two things. I think ultimately on the American side, it's going to be down to economy and Trump's will to continue. And on the Iranian side, once 1 or 2 weeks pass, I think they will be open to the fact of figuring out some kind of an end to this, whereas they can be seen, at least domestically, to say, we fought them off again. And that's obviously to say if the system remains in place.
Okay. And final question in terms of the conflict. I mean, let's say we did have a ceasefire, the Straits of Hormuz reopened. How long would it take for energy markets to just go back to normal, so to speak?
I think the easy answer is it's going to take some time. I mean, there is on several fronts. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz has created an incredible supply chain backlog. It's created essentially the disruptions are unlike anything we've seen before. We have vessels in places that they really should not be. Then you have, and it's going to take time to get them where they're supposed to be. Then you have the small matter of bringing back all these facilities that have been hit, damaged, shut in, back into production. I mean, the repairs on one side, they will take their time, but there's also the matter of bringing back production. I mean, this 7-8 million barrel per day, at least on the oil side that we're talking about, I think largely we've been speaking to kind of officials in the region. I think largely the large majority of those fields should be, I mean, they should be able to bring those back in a matter of days, maximum weeks, to the production levels that they were at before the conflict started, which is a positive. But there's always a worry with these kinds of things that we might have some production loss because of reservoir damage. Now, those I've spoken to don't necessarily think that's something to worry about at the moment. So that's a positive, but still something to consider. And we even heard from Qatar LNG. He was saying he was speaking to the FT earlier, I think it was earlier this week, and he was saying even if the war stops today, it's going to take a matter of weeks before we actually can get back to normal. So I think given that we're not necessarily at a point where I can see the end of this conflict yet, I think we're in this for at least another few weeks, maybe possibly longer.
Yeah. And then final question, what's the best way for people to follow your work and your writings on this subject?
So obviously I think X/Twitter, that's my medium of choice when it comes to at least just getting my voice out. But obviously Argus Media is the company I work for. There's a lot that we do that is, being put behind a paywall, but there's a lot that we do that's not being put in front of the paywall that you can see. So we're doing that increasingly more and more. So yeah, if you'd like to follow what we do, and I think we're pretty good at what we do, if I may say so myself. That's argusmedia.com. You can find us there.
Great. I'll add links to your Twitter account as well, your X account as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
So Nader, once again, thank you so much. I mean, obviously it's an extremely kind of volatile and difficult sort of situation, and you've really helped, reveal some kind of framework that we can use to think about everything. So once again, thanks a lot, Nader.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Bilal.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please subscribe to the podcast show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating, a nice comment, and let other people know about the show. We'll be very, very grateful. Finally, sign up for our free newsletter at macwive.com/free. We'll be back soon, so tune in then.